We're going to talk about evaluation today, in specific program evaluation. So, in general, what is that? This is how you collect, analyze, and interpret data to figure out if the program that you are implementing or have implemented is a success or kind of the level of success. So when you get evaluation data, it can help you know, it can help a funding agency know if you used their money sort of appropriately, because we're always going after efficiency and effectiveness, right? We want to be able to change the behaviors or improve health, but we want to do it as efficiently as possible. And so accountability, when we do evaluation, helps us show to a funding agency or somebody else who's fiscally responsible that we've been able to achieve those goals, or if we haven't, kind of what happened. Also, the second piece, organizational learning. So this is going to help your organization figure out what worked with that program, what didn't work with that program. Were there some things that were either negative or positive, unintended results? And then how do you improve the program if you are implementing it or something like it in the future? A third piece is this knowledge generation. And this is about, like, think about reading research studies in peer reviewed journal articles. Those are done through what we call knowledge generation. So this is providing sort of published information about new practices and on specific health topics. The final piece that evaluation supports is relationship building. So this is opportunities for stakeholders. So remember, that's, top to bottom or kind of throughout horizontally. Think about your program planners, think about your researchers, think about your target members of your target population, those who work with the target population, the community. Doing evaluation helps those people all to discuss evaluation and make some decisions about what do they want to see, what do they want to evaluate, and who gets to find out about the results at the end. So we talked a little bit about a couple of these. One of the things is looking at, did in a program, did you do what was supposed to be done? How can you improve it? Were there barriers that you might be able to remove at a future date, or something that kind of held you back from success? Um, Also, policy, if you look at that last point, like thinking about that idea of, the evaluation piece that you're seeing, does it give you evidence to then give information on maybe some policies that need to change or, be added, for example? So in general, you have these two types of evaluation, and you'll kind of see how these mix with program planning in just a second. So formative evaluation, that is what you were doing while you are forming in the early stages of the planning process and even during implementation of the program. So that's it, and I'll give some details about that. So kind of think about that from a time or a temporal status. Like, this is while you're planning the program and during the implementation of the program. Summative evaluation, like you think about sum, it's like the end of something. So that's conducted after implementation is done to kind of figure out what the program effects were. Okay, so backing up to our formative evaluation, needs assessment, which we covered a few chapters ago, that is a type of formative evaluation, right? So this is where you are trying to figure out, like, what is the most pressing need of a population. That is part of, in your asking questions, right? You're looking at secondary data, you perhaps are collecting primary data, and that is a type of evaluation to figure out where you should target your program. Process evaluation, so kind of moving forward. So needs assessment, establishing the needs, starting to form the program or find the program, starting to adjust the program. Process evaluation is about what you're doing during program implementation. To be able to do a process evaluation, you've got some steps, which we're going to go over in the following slides. First step, form a committee. So this doesn't have to be a different committee than perhaps you've been using for putting together your program. So this can be the same committee. And you'll notice this as we talk about evaluation, that you will have certain overlapping areas with what we've already learned about needs assessment and planning and implementation. One key extra decision that you have to make in a process evaluation is who is going to conduct the evaluation. Is that going to be someone who is existing on your staff who has enough training that they can do it? Or are you going to hire an external consultant? So there are people who freelance or who you can hire and are hired frequently to conduct evaluation for programs and implementations, like, to provide that service. There are pros and cons to using internal people versus hiring outside consultants. One thing that I think is important that your textbook points out is if you do decide to go with internal staff, and there's a nice list of pros and cons in your book and right here, if you're looking on the slide, pros and cons there. If you do decide to go with internal staff, it is likely a good idea that you still hire an external consultant just as someone to consult with, like briefly consult with, just to look over your evaluation plan. So there are levels that you can hire these external consultants at. They can do the whole thing, or you could simply ask them to look over the plan that an internal staff is going to implement. And that is not a bad idea to do that, just to get some confirmation from an expert. Describing the program. So, this is sort of a brief, if you are putting together an evaluation plan, it's briefly, you probably would already have this of your program because you've been sort of forming this along the way, but this brief understanding of what is the purpose, what theory are you using, and what objectives that you have, and your strategies. So all of this terminology should be familiar from when we talked about your program planning, from your program planning chapter. How are you going to deliver this? So think about those issues of fidelity, dose, and reach. Those are three terms that you're going to see again and again. So you definitely need to know sort of what are each of those things. So think about fidelity. How closely are you following the implementation? Does it closely follow the theory or the program as it was intended by the developers? What sort of dose are you giving? So remember, dose is like different units of the program. So it could be classes, and then there's in-person classes, online presentations, social media, demonstration. Could be tables in the community. You're doing tables at community events. So what sort of doses have been delivered, and how many people did you reach there? Or how many people received it. So kind of do a head count. Reach is something that you may not have encountered before. So reach is what proportion of your intended audience actually participated. So you should have a pretty good sense of if you're, say, for example, you're doing something with all the first year students at a college, you should have a really good idea of how many first year students do you have at that college. And you want to know what percent of those did you reach with your program. So you're going to need to do some head counts and compare those two, right? So that's reach. So fidelity, dose, and reach. Three important concepts when you're talking about program evaluation. Then you need to look at, what is it acceptable for those process objectives, right? So what is staff performance? Like, what are we expecting them to do? And remember, when we're talking about objectives, that's typically when we're talking about those process objectives. What are you expecting staff to do? And describe that carefully. Then you're going to develop these process evaluation questions. So this is kind of going over a little bit that we talked about before. This is a nice chart on page 153 in your book, table 7.2. And this will help you kind of understand what questions that you're asking. So how do you plan to answer these questions that you see in this right-hand column? How are you going to collect data? So remember, thinking back when we talked a little bit, kind of beginning talking about data collection, are you doing quantitative, qualitative? Are you doing what's called mixed methods, which is a combination of both of them? So depending on what you want, and your textbook does a great job, and it's up here about how to kind of decide what are you looking for. So, if you're looking for these things that we have, like these issues that we have done here, it's probably qualitative. If you're looking for more like sort of numbers, how much change, what percentage, maybe some costs that are associated, those are numbers, and we are going to use quantitative methods. So most often you're going to have a mix of both. One key thing that is important to remember is that when you are collecting both quantitative and qualitative evaluation, qualitative evaluation takes longer to analyze. So you need to make sure that you're doing your qualitative evaluation first or at the same time that you're doing your quantitative, just to make sure you have enough time to analyze that before you are writing your report, which is the second step. So analyzing your data, and then presenting that in some way. You need to have some plan for how you're going to get the information out. So, are you holding a town hall meeting where you're going to present this? Is it going to live on several different websites? Are you releasing it bit by bit via social media? Are you, at some sort of a meeting where you're reporting to stakeholders? Are you trying to publish the information? So, figure out who that report is going to. So all of that, thinking about that's process evaluation. So that's while you're planning and sort of during your implementation. So switching to what we call summative evaluation. So summative evaluation is what happens from like the end of your program going forward. These terms should look pretty familiar to you. We're talking about outcome and impact evaluation. And I'm hoping that your brain is kind of saying, oh, hey, hold on. That sounds a lot like those objectives that we were writing. So, absolutely. So, think about outcome objectives and impact objectives. So, think about this summative evaluation piece at the end. So, outcome objectives or outcome evaluation, that is how you are measuring KSABs. So, see it up here. It's in a slightly different order, but knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and skills. So, how are you measuring that at the end of the program? And remember, typically that's done right after the program. So, for summative evaluation, impact evaluation, they kind of lump in your intermediate outcomes and your long term outcomes all together. So, this is how effective was this program at reaching its goals? So, like, what behaviors did it change? And remember, behaviors are intermediate, right? And then those long-term things, so those long-term outcomes like, did we decrease deaths due to opioid overdoses, for example? Those are those longer long-term. So we evaluate those as part of summative evaluation. I'm going to stop right here. So I'm splitting these out a little bit. And next set of slides, we will talk about how to do the outcome evaluation.